It's been a fresh minute since we've been together just studying the Gospel of Luke. So, welcome back. I'm excited. I love the book of Luke. I love teaching through the book of Luke and reading the stories and reading how Jesus speaks to people. It's a fresh challenge every time. Luke's such a great storyteller. And as we look at this topic of the coming and present kingdom, and he's introducing Jesus to the world and saying, this is the Messiah, and this is why he was the Jewish Messiah, but this is why he's the Messiah of the world. Man, it's just a fresh challenge every time. So of all the Gospels, I love Luke for his storytelling. I love John because John will hold something up in front of you and say, what do you see? And you'll be like, I see a piece of paper. And John will be like, yeah, but there's more. What do you see? And you'll be like, I see paper with ink. John will be like, yeah, there's more. And John wants you to talk about the tree and the paper mill and the glue and the dirt. And it's crazy. It's mind-boggling. So I love it. But Luke tells a good story. And so we're going to look at one of those stories today. In fact, two of those stories. And we're going to be in Luke chapter 12. We're going to go verses 13 through 34. 32 actually. And before we do, I got to really quickly just hit you up on one thing. When I was growing up, I heard multiple times, even as a young adult and being in church, and I still hear this sometimes, you'll hear somebody talk about Luke chapter 12, and I think it's verses 1 through 3, where Jesus talks about, there's nothing that's hidden that won't be revealed, and what's hidden in the closet's going to be shouted from the rooftop. And I've heard people use that to quote unquote scare people into the fact that God's just going to expose everything. But in the context that Luke shares it, and I think it's pretty clear that what Jesus is saying is your motives reveal your true self. So the things that we want out of life reveal who we truly are and what our ultimate goal is, whether it's service to God or service to self. And I think that that's why that story fits in so well with the next couple of stories that Luke tells here. In verse 13, it starts the story of what they call the parable of the rich fool. But prior to that, Jesus talks about how that you should understand that God values us more than birds and sparrows. And then the next, and then in the third story, which is the one we're going to look at 2 and 3 today, he tells a story about how ravens don't have to, they don't have a storage house for their food, and yet they're able to eat. And we're more valuable than ravens, and we're more valuable than flowers. And so a lot of visual imagery there that would have helped the first century people shape it. And so we have to be careful that we try to understand that, and that we understand how that applies in our lives as well. So I'm going to jump right in, read verses 13 through 21. Jesus is talking to a group of people. His disciples are there. They've had this, back and forth going on, and Jesus has been engaging them. And so what he's doing is he's prompting these people, as well as his disciples. He's calling them to a life of faith, a life that's reimagined, a life where God exists in the personal and in the here and now, a life where surrender is a conscious reality, and the kingdom of God is both present and coming. All right, so we look at this idea of wealth really quickly. Let me just another aside here. Why the focus on the wealth? Why are there questions about what we eat? Why are there questions about inheritance? Why is Jesus concerned about a man and a barn and storing up his stuff? And it's just a good pause for us to realize that we may be at the richest time in the world's history, or we may feel as a culture we're the richest culture in the world. But here's the reality. Every culture, every subset of culture, every ethnic group has always had some idea of what wealth is and what it means to be successful within that group and within that context. And so there's just a challenge here for us to understand that wealth, regardless of where you live and what place you're at in life, there's always going to be a standard. There's always going to be an idea of what success is. And there's always going to be those striving to reach that as their ultimate goal. So here we go, verses 13 through 21. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbitrator between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And then he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, well, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. Continue reading. Then Jesus said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap, they have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They don't labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. So we're going to stop right there. Well, let me finish. You got to finish. You can't skip these last two verses like you're copping out. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The first thing we see is Jesus confronting, through two different situations, the compelling pursuit of wealth. And so you have to understand what's happening here. Jesus is recognized as a teacher, and so this man comes and he hopes to build on Jesus's role and position as a teacher. Okay? So he's not saying, Jesus, I want to learn more of you. He is saying, Jesus, as a man of influence in this countryside, in this town, in this city where we are right now, I want you to weigh in and tell my brother how he should split up the inheritance. And so the first thing we see there is Jesus is, man, this is like deja vu all over again and understanding this, but God does not exist just so we can get our way. God does not exist just so we can get our way. God is not there to fix the world for you. And so the guy's like, teacher, tell my brother. And Jesus is like, man, who made me your judge? Well, what an incredible statement for God to respond with, to say, what do you mean? Why do you want me to do that? Why can't you, go find another judge? Why are you picking me? Why do you think I'm the guy to do your dirty work for you? And here's the thing. And then he points out to him, he says, and the reason I'm not going to have anything to do with it is you don't realize how dangerous greed is. Now here's the point. I mean, just think about it. He says, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. He's like, you're missing life. You are worrying about what your brother has and you don't have, and you're missing out on life. And Jesus is basically saying, if you want to judge and you want to know who God is the person who wants you to experience your life today, not the possibilities of what your life could be. Man, that's an incredible statement. That's an incredible reality to consider, that God is there challenging us in that moment to understand and serve and exist within that place and in that time, that very day. And he tells the guy, he's like, you don't even realize what your greed is doing to you. It's destroying you. And the guy's probably thinking, dude, I don't even have greed. I'm not even being greedy. But my dad left me and my brother $200,000, and my brother hasn't given me anything. And Jesus is like, yeah, and you're spending all your time worried about the money that your brother should give you, and you're not treating your family right, and you're not looking at your neighbor and helping your neighbor. You're not doing your job right. You're not focused. And by the way, you don't even realize that I'm God. You're calling me teacher because your only concern is getting your money. And why should I be your judge? And this is Jesus' response to the guys. Why should I be your judge? I mean, who am I to surrender my life to fix your desires. And that's just a very incredible challenge. And so then he says, and by the way, since you brought money up, let's have a little chat about money. And he tells the story of the man. And by the way, the man seems to be, a regular dude. It's a big place, had a big place, and so he had an abundant crop. And there's a couple things that happen here. The man consults with himself. First of all, he doesn't consult with God, doesn't consult with his family. He just consults with himself. And so here's a couple of things that we see in this passage, that some of wealth's dangers, things that wealthiness and riches will cause us to do. First of all, it causes us to think of self before others. It causes us to think of self before others. Have 2 children in a room, put 2 toys on the floor, pretty good chance that they'll swap back and forth between those 2 toys. Put 5 toys on the floor, pretty good chance one of them's going to want 4 out of the 5, if not all 5. That's just human reality. We want everything that we see. And so Jesus says the first thing you got to understand is that one of the dangers of wealth is it prompts us to think of self before others. This man says, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. The man doesn't say, I've got an abundance to give away. The man doesn't say, I've got an opportunity to serve. The man says, I've got a problem because I've got too much, but I got to figure out how to keep what I have. So that wealth prompts us to think of self before others. The second thing is wealth prompts us to believe that our agendas are primary. So here's what happens. The man says, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger barns. So in other words, first thing he says is, I've got too much, I got to figure out how to keep it. And the second thing he says is, I've got too much, I have to build bigger barns for myself. His agenda is all shaped around himself, and this is one of the dangers of wealth. We think that life should revolve around us. And we see that. The wealthier we get in our society, the more internally focused that we are, the more ability we have to communicate, the less we truly do communicate with others, the more we insulate ourselves and surround ourselves with our own ideas and our own thoughts and our own desires, and we don't allow ourselves to be challenged by others. So we believe our agendas are primary. And then the third part of that is the man says, then after it's all done, I'll put my grain away and I'll be able to say, hey, life is going to be great. I'll eat, drink, and be merry. So what happens is wealth promotes an infatuation with personal enjoyment, security, and entertainment. Ouch, because that kind of stings for today. But guess what? It stung 2,000 years ago. And it stung 5,000 years ago and 10,000 years ago. And however long back you want to go, the reality of it is wealth promotes this infatuation with self, entertainment, and enjoyment and security. And instead of just saying, I'm glad I had breakfast, we want certain things for breakfast. And instead of saying, I'm glad I get to eat supper, we want a particular type of food from a particular type of place. Wealth promotes that. It absolutely does. I'll just give you a quick aside. Christy and I've been married 22 years now, and during that time, each of us has had different times where we've borne different responsibilities. And one of my realities right now is I do more of the regular grocery shopping, which I've always participated in it, but I do more of the regular part of it. And I realized the other day when I was in the store that I had picked up multiple items without paying any attention to the price. And I went back in my mind to 22 years ago when we would go to the store together and we would sit there and agonize over whether we should pay $1.69 for the off-brand cereal or whether we could afford to pay the $3.10 for the branded cereal. And I was like, man, what an incredible difference in time. They don't even think about that anymore. In this certain situation, I don't just go buy anything, but the items I'd picked up had caused that memory to come back to how we used to have to, over every single item, debate on whether it should be branded or not and what we would pay for it, what we were willing to pay for it. And that's what wealth does. Wealth leads us down this habit of just satisfying self and making sure that we get the best of what we want and that we do what we want to do. What an incredible condemnation that Jesus is throwing at this fella here and at us. Because then he moves right into that. So this is how wealth compels us, all right? So the compelling pursuit of comfort. Because we don't even think about it as being rich. We just want to be comfortable. That's what everybody tells me. I don't want to be rich. I just want to be comfortable. And if I ask you what comfort is, you'll probably just say, well, a little more than what I have now, which means we want to be rich. But that's a whole other aside. So the compelling pursuit of comfort. Now Jesus contrasts that with what the standards of faith look like. And there's 3 standards that he gives us. They are supply, production, and giving. He gives us 3 standards: supply, production, and giving. And he does that by telling us 3 stories. He said, first of all, he said the raven doesn't have anywhere to store his food, and yet he eats regularly. So Jesus challenges us on our ideas of supply. And the second thing is, Jesus says, the lilies of the field, they don't have factories where they spin out these great tapestries to make themselves beautiful, and yet they're more beautiful than anything that Solomon had in his household. Production. That is the drug of the 21st century, production. And then giving. Seeing what you have as an opportunity to benefit and value others over self. And so let's just break this down really quickly. Realize that what you have is not the standard for who you are, right? So the ravens don't have storage and yet they eat. God provides. So supply is not what it seems. These guys don't have a barn. The rich man had a barn and he died. The ravens don't have a barn and yet they eat. We too will eat. And this isn't just talking about having physical food. This is talking about having this is talking about having a recognition that our lives should be lived with a certain disregard to the fundamental principles of the world around us. And the fundamental principles of the world around us are this: look out for yourself. Put something for yourself. Hide it for yourself. Make sure that others don't see what you have. So this is what the rich man is doing when he builds a bigger barn, in which the ravens don't have, and yet they're eating. Okay, so the first thing is that we should not be consumed by this idea of supply. It's just a challenge for us, and I think about the period of time we just went through as we're coming up on the January of 2021, and we just went through a period of time where basically so many people who claim the name of Jesus Christ and claim that Jesus is their Lord have told us that we won't exist in the future if we didn't do a certain political reality or a certain political function. And that is such a contrast to what Jesus is teaching here. That our supply is in who God is and not in our abilities, okay? So the first thing we have to do is reject the principle of supply in the sense that we don't make our lives about consuming and setting aside for ourselves. The ravens don't have it, and yet they eat. God looks at us and says, hey, a life lived, one of the standards of faith, lived for the kingdom of God, will be that you don't look at life as a way of getting more for yourself. And man, that can translate into every facet of your life. The way you eat, the way you drink, what clothes you wear. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Where you go, how you spend your vacations, what you do with your free time, how you treat your family, what hobbies you pursue, everything. All right. So, number one, the principle, the standard of faith when it comes to supply. The second one is the standard of faith when it comes to production. And the story there is of lilies. And Jesus says the lilies are more beautiful than anything that Solomon made or built. And it's an interesting thought because I mentioned just a minute ago that production is one of the major drugs of the 21st century, and it has certainly infiltrated Christendom. It has certainly infiltrated the church of people who claim their faith and trust in Jesus. In fact, you could even say that it's our sacred cow. Efficiency, maximization. And it's interesting because I often hear pastors or other spiritual leaders telling people how much more they should produce. And there's just no focus on the fact that we are eternal beings and we have eternity to produce for God. Now, there's no excuse to sit back and not do anything. The lilies of the field, they did what they were able to do in the setting that they were in. And that's our call. It's a standard of faith that where you are, be beautiful. In other words, quit saying and quit planning to do, but rather be. Learn to rest in God. Learn to trust in His faithfulness. Learn to be kind when others are bitter. Learn to be gentle when others are harsh. Learn to be meek when others are authoritative. This is what we're called to do. This is the beauty that God has called us to. So production is not as it appears. Embrace a life of daily faith, the circumstances that are happening to you. Invest in the things that shape you in the shape that God is forming your life in prayer and in reflection and study of God's goodness and God's mercy. And then the last standard of faith is give. And he says this, he says, take what you have and give it away. And people have always asked, well, does that mean literally? Well, I'll just say this to you. It means what God tells you it means. And what the most basic interpretation of that is that our lives are about to be serving others, looking out for their well-being, looking out for their needs, realizing and noticing the cares and concerns of their life, whether that's financial, whether that's spiritual, whether that's emotional, whatever it is, that we are supposed to be invested in giving. So 3 standards of faith. 3 standards of faith that contrast the pursuit of comfort. And they are: supply is not what it appears to be. Production doesn't make you who you think you are. And giving is what God has called us to. God bless you. I'll see you next time in the coming and present kingdom.